Al, the perennial question, is this the best of all possible worlds, seems in one sense a trivial question, but I have felt that it's really very probative, because if there really is a God, and if God is really all powerful and all good, and this is the world, the only one we seem to know, why wouldn't it be the best of all possible worlds?
Right. Well, this came up in particular in connection with the philosopher Leibniz, who said, just as you did, God is all powerful, God is all knowledgeable, God is all good. So he would have to create the best he can. The best he can would be the best of all possible worlds. Therefore, this must be the best of all possible worlds. And then Voltaire wrote this parody, Candide, about this Dr. Pangloss who goes around from one horrifying disaster to the next and saying, oh, well, this is the best of all possible worlds and so on. There's a really good reason for this, isn't it? Wonderful, and so on. But now if you think about it, the best of all possible worlds, do we know there is a best of all possible worlds? Maybe the best of all possible worlds, that idea is like the idea of the greatest natural number. For any natural number you pick out, there's a greater. Maybe for any possible world, no matter how wonderful it is and so on, there's an even better possible world. Or maybe there's a whole bunch of possible worlds that are all tied for best. Then God would have a lot of freedom. He could select among them. There just wouldn't be any best of all possible worlds. And it's very tempting to think that for any possible world, no matter how wonderful it is, there's an even better one. Say, one more person enjoying a life of unalloyed bliss, one more angel praising the Lord, and so on. So I don't think that this has to be the best of all possible worlds, because I'm inclined to think there isn't any best of all possible worlds. But the Christian story is that even if it's not the best of all possible worlds, maybe there isn't any, it's a really good possible world. And to think about possible worlds, which one is better than another, you have to think about great-making properties or good-making characteristics of a possible world. What makes one possible world better than another? Why is it better that this one be actual than that one be actual? And among the properties involved would no doubt be such things as how many sentient creatures there are enjoying how much happiness or whatever. But according to the Christian story, there is another great-making property here of maybe a totally different order of magnitude. According to the Christian story, it's often said to be the greatest story ever told. According to the Christian story, God created rational, moral creatures, we human beings, maybe others as well. I mean, angels, among whom some are fallen angels. And some of these creatures, many of them, in the case of human beings, our whole race has fallen into sin. We have turned our back on God and are rebellious and are not prepared to follow him and are not prepared to obey him and the like. So he creates these creatures who turn their back on him, rebel against him, and God is willing to devise a scheme of salvation that entails enormous suffering on his own part. The incarnation and the atoning life and suffering and death of Jesus, the second person of the Divine Trinity. Jesus is a man and also the second person of the Divine Trinity, who, think about Mel Gibson's movie, who has to undergo enormous suffering in order to achieve a state of affairs in which human beings can once more be reconciled with God. Well, now, that the first being of the universe should be willing to do this in order to help to advance the welfare of creatures who are, of course, his vast inferiors and who have also turned their backs on him, rebelled against him, that's a really impressive characteristic of a possible world. Maybe all the really good possible worlds are like that. And if that is the case, the thing to think would be, even though our world isn't the best of all possible worlds, maybe there isn't any, it still is a really good world.
How would God have done this? Would there have been sort of a laying out of all the possible worlds? And maybe, as you said, maybe there are many that are tied. because you could always add one more to, so there really probably isn't a really number one possible world, but did God kind of lay them all out and then sort of think about which one to make?
I think that's the way we have to think about it, but it can't be exactly like that. It's not like at one time, so to speak, God hadn't made up his mind yet as to what possible world is going to be the actual world, or what he's going to do, at least with respect to actualizing the world that turns out to be actual. Of course, we do our part with respect to that too. I don't think it could be that at one time God hadn't made up his mind yet, and then he made up his mind, and okay, well, this is the way I'm going to do it. It's rather that from all eternity, he's always planned that it be a certain way, but his plans that it be a certain way do depend on his knowledge about these different possible worlds. So there isn't a time at which he makes this decision, but still the decision is contingent on his knowledge of which of these worlds is good, which of these worlds has these properties. So he really does select from among the whole range of possible worlds the one that's going to be actual.
Because there's a lot of stuff in the world. If you can look at the laws of physics, this complicated, hard stuff.
Right.
And not, at least not intuitively obvious that it has to be exactly the way it is and there's no choice in the matter. Some scientists think there is, but most now don't. Most now think that the laws of physics have to do with some probabilistics or uncertainty, and they could have been different. And so if they could have been different in the laws of physics, then if God indeed created them, he would have to have chosen it to be this way rather than some other way to make actual.
Yeah.
And we can extrapolate from that to the enormity of the interactions among sentient creatures or universal bodies and everything else. I mean, the number of pieces of data that you would have to use to define a world is, hard to imagine.
Absolutely, right. It's sort of totally beyond our possibilities. I mean, we have to think of the world as beginning, 12 billion years ago, and all the things that happened in all the different parts of the world. And then there's we know a lot about Earth, let's say, but that's just a minuscule portion of the entire universe. And then maybe there isn't just one universe. Maybe there are, as some people say, inflationary cosmology and the like, all kinds of, maybe even infinitely many, who knows, So, right. So a given possible world would in fact include all those different universes that there are. It's not that each universe would be a different possible world. Rather, the actual world would include if there are infinitely many different cosmoi, it would include all those different cosmoi.
Yeah, and that is one, and then there is maybe an infinite, not maybe, almost certainly an infinite number of those total worlds from which God would have had chosen in some way or had opportunity to actualize one of them.
So what we're really doing is seeing a little bit of what omniscience would really be. I mean, it would really be something pretty impressive.
I would certainly agree with that. Did God have freedom to choose among these worlds, and maybe one of them, the ones he chose, had less sentient creatures? Did God have freedom to make some choices here?
Well, I think so. As we were saying, according to Leibniz, he would have to choose the best of all these worlds, but there probably isn't any best. So if there isn't any best, then there isn't any particular one such that he's obliged by his very nature to choose that one. So he does have freedom. It might be, some people have thought, well, this is a terrible position for God to be in, because no matter which world he chooses, he could have chosen a better one, and does he worry about that or regret this and the like of that? Well, if for any possible world there's a better possible world, then it's just a matter of logic and necessity that God's condition will be such that for anyone he chooses, he could have chosen a better one. It's not a cause for despair or unhappiness on his part or on ours.
Maybe this is a kind of a practice round for God, and the real one is coming up next when he learns what happens when he makes this one.
Well, I don't know. A possible world would include everything. It wouldn't be that here we've got the possible world ending at a certain time, and now we're going to start a different one. That's not going to happen. Right.